everyone. Welcome to our semi-regular class that we're teaching from Hex's place.
Excellent. So, real quick, we're going to sit for about a minute or two to give people a chance to get onto the stream. Hi, I see Tanya, and I think your wife is watching. Oh, hey,
I didn't do it.
Hey, Cassandra. Oh, and I see folks are here. Great, it's so nice to see so many people already watching. Fantastic. Excellent. We have 7 people going. All right. That's more than enough for me.
Yeah, well, let's give a couple more minutes to see if anybody shows up late at the door. So, we're going to be talking about writing Skaldic poetry, specifically for beginners. And I know that Hex is going to provide a link in the chat, if they haven't already, that will give you an opportunity to download the worksheet that I'll be going through for the class, and that may help. So, what is Skaldic poetry? Well, it is a subset of the overall Norse poetic style. There were Eddic poetry, which is the poetry that was done in the manuscript of the Poetic Edda, which was transcribed, not written, but transcribed by Snorri Sturluson. And then on the other side of that, we have Skaldic poetry, which was the court meter. It's the style that they used to talk about kings and heroes and great deeds, and it was much more official as part of the court scenario, whereas the Eddas were a little more open and the authors were anonymous. Most of the extant examples that we have for Skaldic poetry, we knew exactly who wrote them. So, for starters, Skaldic poetry can be a little daunting because it is very rules heavy. It is one of the most complicated styles of poetry I've ever seen. And when you first get started, it can seem overwhelming if you try to take on all of the rules from the very beginning. So as people start getting into it, I recommend being aware of all of the rules, but starting with just a subset so you can kind of get familiar, write your first few poems, get used to the sound and the feel of the style, and you can actually put out some fantastic stuff that's very entertaining just using these basic rules, and it will absolutely sound the part, and that's perfectly fine for getting involved with it to start. And as you begin to grow and get more comfortable, like anything else, if you're going to make shoes or you're going to start leatherworking, you're not going to make shoes first. So we start with something simple, like your stitches. Same thing with writing poetry. So getting into the handout, a couple of things real quick. I have the advanced rules and the beginners in a single document here, and if you open it up and you have a chance to look at it, I've highlighted the sections for beginners in blue so you can kind of focus on those. If you print in color or if you look at it on your screen, it'll be easy to recognize. But there's a much smaller subset of the overall rules that we'll be focused on today, and if you can get along with these, we'll do great. Hex, you feel like we're ready to roll in?
I think so. I see we've got a couple more folks that have joined us. Hi, everyone. If you get a chance, if you look in the comments on the feed itself, you will see a link to the handout, so you can follow along on your Google Doc. I recommend that you actually download it so that way you can edit it when we come to the actual interactive part. So
right, and it's this class is built with the handout as a worksheet where you can actually use what we talk and use the form in the worksheet to help build your own poem. And we'll get to that as we go along. So, what are the rules for Skaldic poetry? Well, let me back up a step. Skaldic poetry, the word for the style in Old Norse, is drottvad. And it's maybe easier just to say Skaldic poetry, but that's the word. Drottvad literally translates to court meter. So, what makes up a Skaldic poem? Well, for starters, it is stanzaic by nature, which means there are a set number of lines in the poem. It can vary, but it will always be a multiple of 8. That being said, the stanzas are actually broken up into half stanzas of 4 lines each. And I'm going to kind of gloss over some of the Norse words because they're not really important to what we're going to be talking about today. But the Old Norse words are in the document if you want to know what the actual terms for what I'm talking about are. So our poem will have at least 8 lines and will be a multiple of 8 for the total number of lines. Bear with me, I'm still getting over a cold. The verse is also trochaic in its meter, with some variations. We're not going to be focused on that particular rule right now, and especially working in English, which is iambic by nature, it can be a little more difficult to get the feel for it. What I mean by iambic and trochaic is where the stress syllable in a word is. Trochee it helps sound like the stress. It's trochee, trochee. So it's the stress syllable at the beginning of the word followed by an unstressed syllable. Whereas iambic is I am, I am, I am. So a lot of Shakespearean poetry, you've probably heard of the term iambic pentameter. We're basically doing the reverse. So that's something that you can work into, and it's something to look for as you get comfortable. But when you first start getting used to it, I don't really recommend having that as a focus. I think there are some other areas which get more of the overall feel for what you're looking for. Which leads us to the next rule. Each line contains exactly 6 syllables. That is not a lot of syllables to convey information in a single line. So using smaller words, 1, 2, 3 syllable words, is going to be very important as you get going. You're going to want to condense some of your more flowery words down into something with much fewer syllables. With rare exceptions, it's exactly 6 syllables. Sometimes you can get away with 7 if there are 2 syllables that run together really easy to make a single sound. And you can look at this if I was going to say I live in a house. N-A would really be 2 syllables, but the way we say it, in a house, in-a is treated like a single syllable. And you can do that in the Skaldic verse as well to kind of fudge the 6 syllable rule into 7. Be very sparing with this and be cautious about how you use it to make sure it's something that blends really well in that style. The next rule that we absolutely have to focus on is the use of alliteration. Alliterative poetry differs in its rhyme scheme from sonnets and other types of poetry that we in the West are used to hearing, in that we're focused on the sounds at the beginning of a word instead of at the end. So when we talk about alliteration, we're talking about the beginning initial sound of a word. And it's that repetition of the initial sound. So any vowel will alliterate with any other vowel. So A alliterates with E and O and U sounds. Not necessarily spelling, but the vocal sounds that you hear is what we're looking for. Consonants only relate to other consonant sounds that are the same. So H sound. So hear my words of heroes, that sort of thing, where that H is the repeating sound. An example that I use in the documentation comes from Shakespeare. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes. You can hear that repeating F sound at the beginning of the words. That's what we're looking for with alliteration. And there's a special note about alliterations beginning with S in this style, and it's really more specialized when you're talking about its use in the Old Norse language. But if you want to get really particular about it, you can use that in English too, and it's that the SK sound, the SP sound, and the ST sound only alliterate with their own sounds. So speak and spark will alliterate, but speak and scald won't. So again, that's something that I would tend to leave until you're a little more comfortable just writing some of the other alliterations. Placement of the alliterations becomes extremely important for 2 out of 3 alliterations in our pattern. The first 2 alliterations will always happen in the odd numbered lines. The first of which can kind of float anywhere in the first 4 syllables, and the second one has to be at the 5th syllable. Again, I stress, don't worry in your initial writing about making sure that you're hitting that 5th syllable for your alliteration. For now, as you're just getting started, make sure that you've got 2 in the odd line, and we'll work towards that as we grow. The second line, the even lines, has your 3rd alliteration in the set. That one has to be at the beginning of a line. And that's something that you shouldn't deviate even getting started, because that really helps to sink in the alliteration. So, again, just to reiterate, for beginners, you have 3 alliterations in your set. 2 in the odd line, 1 at the beginning of the even line. And that will be a pattern that repeats throughout the poem. 2 in every odd line, 1 in the following even that matches. The odd line will also consist of an imperfect rhyme, sometimes called a half rhyme. And that will happen on 2 of the stressed syllables. This is something that's not not easy for a native English speaker to pick up on, because it's not something that we're really taught early on to listen for. And the imperfect rhyme is where the final consonant sound is the same, but the vowel sound preceding it is different. So an example would be the word cat and hit would be different. They both have the same sound at the end, but the preceding vowel sound is different. At, it. So that is what we talk about with an imperfect rhyme. The placement of the imperfect rhyme, again, one of them has to be on the 5th syllable of the odd line. The other can vary somewhere in the first 4, but has to be on a stressed syllable. Not going to focus on that one for beginners. That one's really tricky. It's hard to work in if you're not used to hearing it or working with it. And even a lot of the research that I did, people that are really well known, Hollander, who I have in the references in his stuff, when he does his examples, he will tell you in the early part that it's typically lost on our English speaking ears, so he doesn't even bother with it.
It almost seems like a math problem.
It can be. It's very particular in placement.
I like a good math problem. Challenge accepted.
The even lines, in addition to starting with one of our alliterations.
We do actually have a question real quick.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Tanya would like to know, she's curious if you know why the rules are so strict for this type of poem.
I don't know why they are so strict, other than it probably has to do with the formality that it was part of the court meter. That probably has a lot to do with it. I can tell you that this style of poetry fell out of favor as the language changed. As the Old Norse language morphed, it became harder and harder for skalds to meet all of these rules in their poems, and eventually that's one of the reasons why it fell out of favor and became less and less popular as time went by. You know, language morphology and such. Best answer I've got.
Oh, that's awesome, thank you.
So the even lines, in addition to the alliterations, they also have a perfect rhyme in them. And that's the sort of rhyme that we think of in our everyday life. You know, cat, bat, kit, hit, bit. That same sort of ending, same ending consonant sound, same preceding vowel sound. And that can be placed somewhere in that second line, in that even line. It is less important in its placement than it is in the odd lines. And the final thing that we have to use that really sets this style of poetry aside is its use of kennings. A kenning is any sort of colorful metaphor, typically where it takes a pair of things to talk about a single word.
Pardon me.
We may have a visitor. Hang on.
No, somebody's just walking around outside the shut the blind.
We may have just been warned. We're okay. So, kennings, highly colorful, often obtuse metaphors. They are, again, they are used with extreme frequency in Skaldic poetry. It wasn't unheard of for almost every noun in a line to have some sort of kenning used for it as a replacement. Again, you don't have to go that heavy into it, but having a good number of kennings throughout your poem will help give it that sort of feel that you're looking for, that sound that makes it sound much older than it is.
His Majesty just joined us.
Excellent. So when we talk about kennings, we're talking about ways where you can reference something as something else. So, for instance, one of the most famous kennings is found in the opening lines of Beowulf, where they say, Ofa Hronhrod Hurn Shold. Hronhrod means the whale road. And clearly there's not a whale on a road somewhere. It's a reference to the sea. So we take something that, you know, a whale would actually live in, the sea, and we sort of flip that to be a land version. So it's the whale road. It's the road that the whales travel. I've called the sea the seal plains before. So it's the plains where the seals play. Examples in the worksheet, ring giver is the king. He hands out the arm rings. Or Thor's laughter being thunder. And I can teach a whole class just on kennings because they can get very complicated because you can have kennings within kennings, and that's a whole nother subset. It's a lot of fun though. Now, just as a review, that's all of the rules. As a review, what we're going to cover just for beginners are 8 lines minimum, with the whole poem being a multiple of 8 for the total number of lines. Each line has to have exactly 6 syllables, with our slight variation of 7 for sounds like inna, things like that run really quick together. Our alliterations, 2 in the odd line, 1 at the beginning of the even, and our use of kennings. That should be a much simpler subset of the rules for us to get started. Now, the next part of the worksheet, or the handout, is the actual worksheet where you can work along with us. So I spent some time trying to devise a way to help myself make sure that I was hitting all of my rules properly when I was doing my poem. So the worksheet is something that I created. I got some ideas from how other people were marking it up, and nothing I found was really working for me. So I came up with something that would. So the key for the worksheet has our notation spelled out here, and the next page actually has the worksheet with our 8 lines on it. And it's broken up into 4 lines each for our half stanzas. Each odd line has several notations in the squares where things have to occur. We're going to flex a little bit again for beginners. Our slash will be for stressed syllables. X will be unstressed syllables. A for alliteration will show where our alliterations are. H is a syllable that is part of a half rhyme or our imperfect rhyme. P for our full rhyme, and K marks the start of a kenning. So I have places that are always supposed to be marked already in the worksheet, but as you're working along, you can add in areas where they flex. So I'm going to start as an example showing a piece of the poem that I put into Kingdom A&S a couple of years ago and show you how that fits into the worksheet. And I'll just start at the very beginning. The poem is, "Hearken close and hear of heroes' stories soaring." So let's just take those first 2 lines and we start filling in the syllables in the table that we have here. So hearken close and hear of. This is our first line. 6 syllables. Hearken close and hear of. I see that the H sound is my alliteration. So I can put an A at the beginning in the first one to mark that's where my floating alliteration occurs in the line. Hearken close and hear of heroes' stories soaring. Heroes' stories soaring. So my alliteration at the beginning of the next line follows that H sound. Now we can point out where all of the rules are in here. We've got a stressed syllable, an unstressed, sorry, that's an X, close, and hear of heroes' stories soaring. So again, trochaic, hearken, close, and hear of. We're following that trochaic meter. Don't have to focus on that as a beginner, but it's something that helps the flow of the poem go if you can get used to using it. We look at our half rhymes or our imperfect rhymes in the odd line. I'll show you an example. Hearken, hear of. They're focused on the stressed syllable. Har, hear. They both have that R as the same consonant sound, but the preceding vowel sound is different. They're spelled the same, but they sound different. Har, hear. And then in the, I'll put my H there for half rhyme. In the even line, we have our perfect rhyme. Again, it's going to be on our stressed syllables. Store, soar. Same ending consonant sound, same preceding vowel sound. So those would be our perfect rhymes. Beginners, don't worry about this. Focus on hearken close and hear of heroes' stories soaring. Get your alliteration, get your 6 syllables per line, and let's move on to the next pair of lines. El Isif finds Fuelen forming bonds with Orm's bites.
Can you repeat that line again?
Yes. Elisif finds Fuelen forming bonds with Orm's bites. Elisif finds Fuelen. Yeah, my fingers didn't work right. Elisif finds Fuelen forming bonds with Orm's bites. So 6 and 6. We look at our alliteration. Where's our alliteration? Finds, Fuelen, forming. So we have this repeating F sound. This one varies a little bit in its trochaic meter because of the name Elisif. Elisif is that's you have your stress at the beginning. That L is sif are two unstressed, and then finds Fuelen, forming bonds with Orm's bites. So our alliterations are find, fuel, form. Then we're on to our next set of lines. Fenrir's stalking sons pad slyly by in Ron's hall. I skipped over one of our kennings earlier, and I should probably go back to that. At the end of our first half stanza, we have our first real kenning here. Orm's bites. Orm is an Old Norse word for serpent or snake. And serpents are often used as parts of kennings dealing with swords. So if I were to come up with a kenning for a sword, I might call it a steel serpent. Again, a serpent being a long, slender animal, roughly shaped like a sword, and giving it an animal that strikes would be representative there. So when we say that Elisif finds Fuelen forming bonds with Orm's bites, what we're saying is when they met, they formed a bond by fighting. And then we get into our kennings for our next line. Fenrir's stalking sons. Fenrir being the great wolf that will, devour Odin and kill Odin in Ragnarok. So Fenrir's stalking sons. So when we're talking about the sons of Fenrir, we mean any wolf. So wolves are typically used in connotation with longships. They would be called sea wolves, particularly if they were raiding your community. You would call them sea wolves because they are the aggressors. You might call them something much more benevolent if they were returning to your home with treasures that they received from somewhere else. So when we say Fenrir's stalking sons pad slyly by in Ron's hall, Ron's hall is our next kenning. Ron is the goddess of the sea. So again, Ron's hall, the hall of the sea goddess, would be the ocean. So these two sets of kennings actually make one big kenning. Fenrir's stalking sons pad slyly by in Ron's hall. The sea wolves were moving through the ocean. So very simple understanding once you break it down. The next two lines. Westward bore the beasts and brought the dawning autumn. Where are our alliterations? Westward bore the beasts and brought the dawning autumn. We have our repeating B sound for our alliterations. That's bore, beasts, brought. Kennings, beasts. It's really more of a Haiti. It's a one-to-one. We are referencing the sea wolves as the beasts here, so it's just another reference to the kenning that we built before. So westward bore the beasts and brought the dawning autumn. So as Fenrir's sons pad slyly by in Ron's hall, the sea wolves traveled westward in the fall, in early fall. So as you can see, just getting started, comparing all of the rules like we did in the first two gets pretty complicated and a little hairy. But when we're focused on a much smaller subset, it goes by much faster for starters, and we can easily make sense of where each of our pieces are. Once you use the table to line out your syllables, coming back in and using the notation in the worksheet, you can double check where you've hit each mark, and you can make corrections if you need to, if something doesn't quite fit. It also allows you to come back a little later, and if you want to work in some of your rules, some of the additional rules that as you get more advanced, you can take the stuff that you've already done and slightly rework it, where you don't have to throw the whole thing out. You can just reword some things here and there and maybe hit more of the rules as you go along. How are we doing on questions?
Nothing yet, but if we want to take a second, anybody who has questions, be awesome to speak up now. Also, I just want to do a quick shout out to everybody who's joined us. We have had people from Ethelmark, the East, Glenavon, joining us. So,
hey everybody.
Hey everyone. Looks like we've had quite a few shares. It's really awesome. It's nice to see so many people excited about this.
I'm going to lean forward here.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If
grab that.
you haven't seen it yet, this is the most recent edition of the Complete Anachronist, which covers Viking poetry. Highly recommend you pick this up. It's got some fantastic resources in it. And it not only covers the Drottkvat court meter, but it also covers a lot of information about the Eddic styles as well.
Oh, somebody from Georgia here as well. So, Meridies, yes? Yes. Unless you're in the tiny part that's part of Atlantia. So for those of you who are joining us from far and away, we actually we try and do these ANS nights every other week. Usually the second and fourth Monday of the month. I try to live stream them as much as possible so that we can share our craft far and wide. You know, we may live in the modern Middle Ages, but I sure like to lean into the modern part to, for us to be able to reach out and actually interact with each other. So yes, the worksheets are available online. They were linked up higher in the post, but I can drop them in again real quickly now that we're coming up on the end of the class.
Well,
or if you have
not quite yet.
Oh, my apologies. We're just taking a quick break for questions and and promo for, feel free to come join us again. I always try to post these in the Kingdom group and people can share them far and wide. So, there you go. You're welcome. All right. So, back to you, Finn.
All right. So we've covered the rules for writing the poetry. So you know what is going to be required of you in order to make the style. The question then becomes, what do you write about? How do you get your inspiration? Well, this style lends itself well to word fame, building up people that you see doing something extraordinary, telling someone's story, telling a story about an event or a person that inspires you. That is where I have found the stuff to come the easiest, and it's what they would have done in period. This is our court meter. This is where we tell of the stories of great kings and heroes, great deeds, where we went and got our
You got a question? Yeah.
where we went and got our riches and how.
A question. Is there any sort of rule regarding sentences continuing on to the next line? Hypothetically, if I follow the rules of alliteration, could I write an entire stanza using one sentence?
Absolutely. That is absolutely something you can do, and we have done that in the example that I provided. Fenrir's stalking sons passed slyly by in Ron's hall. Semicolon. Westward bore the beasts and brought the dawning autumn. One sentence, one whole stanza.
Awesome. Thank you for the question, Rurik.
Now, that said, we try to keep our thoughts contained within a stanza. So try not to have a thought conveyed or a single description conveyed across a stanza. If it goes from one half stanza to the next, that's okay, but try not to go past 8 lines to describe one thing. You can, if you can do it in half stanzas, do that. That would be even better. So try to keep it short and concise. So how do you get inspiration? Well, first thing I do is, the easiest thing for me is to look around and see who the people are that inspire me. And then I look at, what it is that they do that inspires me. And I just start writing it down. What are their characteristics? What are things that that everyone knows them for? I'll use my first Skaldic poem that I ever wrote as an example. Most of us in the Kingdom of Onsteora know Ivar Runamagi very well. And he was one of the very first people I met when I joined the SCA. So he's been a very strong influence for me. So for my first poem, I really wanted to do something that, gave back a little to a man that had given me so much. So when I started writing the poem, I was like, okay, so if I were going to describe Ivar to someone, how would I do it? Well, I know he's a lion of Onsteora, so I'm going to have some mention of a lion in there. He's got silver hair, so I'll mention that somewhere. What does he do? Well, one of the things that he's known for is giving people Viking names, so I can make note of that. He's pelican, I can make note of that. He's a Norseman, make note of that. And you can get some information from the order of precedence and find out what awards they have, and you can come up with kennings for those. You can work out kennings or things that describe the person. So when I talk about Ivar in his poem, it opens, silver lion, skalds sing songs both loud and proud for man called master, axe bill, mead slayer, deed shouter. So silver lion, we reference his silver hair and the fact that he's a lion of Onsteora right off. Mm-hmm. Skald sing songs both loud and proud for man called master, so it references his peerage. Axe bill, that one is where we get a little deeper into our kennings. So what's an axe bill? Well, an axe is a blade that has a curved shape, and a bill is the mouth of a bird. And what is a bird that has a curved bill? Well, pelican. That's a pelican. So when we call him an axe bill, I'm referring to him being a pelican. We know this Norseman is name giver, fame teller. We talk about him giving names. We talk about fame teller. He goes into court uninterrupted a lot, as is his right, but he does. And, he often does that as an opportunity to provide word fame for people that may not have any other way to get that sort of recognition. So those are the types of things that you can do to bring about that sort of interest in your person. And that's sort of how I go about building the inspiration for a poem. And as you get more comfortable with doing it, you'll notice that some of the most fun you'll have with it are coming up with the kennings. One of my favorite kennings is one I use for Duke Roffin. And Roffin, being the Norse word for raven, and he lives in the steppes area in, the Barony of the Steppes. So I call him the blood starling of the steppes. So, starling being a different kind of bird, blood starling, ravens are carrion birds. So that's how we kind of get that kenning, but it's a much more interesting visual, and it sounds very interesting when you say something like that instead of a raven. So if you're getting started, think about the people that inspire you. Think about some great deed that you witnessed, and start making notes about it. Just write down everything you can, and then take your words that identify that person or that event, and just start making your list of kennings. And you'll be interested. I think you'll find it fascinating how once you have your kennings that you like for these, how easily the other words start to form around them. But again, that's what I have for not only the rules to use, but some guidelines about how you can go about finding your inspiration and how to get started in that flow.
That's
Anybody
awesome.
got any other questions?
Oh, we've had some fun comments here. One is, oh my god, they killed Kennings. For a little South Park. Some folks chatting with each other. Step 1, find awesome people. Step 2, use obscure kennings to describe them. Thank you, Katie.
It's fact.
And then we have Rorik, who has shared that one of my favorite kennings came from my first poem. Battle rivers bear birth, blood runs on battle boards. I like that.
Lots of alliteration there too.
Very nice. Yeah. So if anybody has questions, now is a great time to ask them.
Yes.
Any clarification that you want, let's see. Give people a second to catch up on the feed because it's a couple of seconds slow.
I should also toss out, while we're waiting on that to come in, shameless plug. If you enjoy my writings and you would like to see more of my original works, you can go to www.ronanfinn.com. That's RONANFIONN.com. And from there, I have put up almost all of my original works. There's still a few out there that I'm not willing to share yet. So there's some stuff in the works and some stuff that's just not ready for public consumption. So
if you are very lucky, you might even get an award rec from this man that writes it in.
I do, when I write my award recs, I typically write to the Crown in an email and will do it in this style as the award rec.
It's very nice to see. So, if you ever get lucky enough. Now, if anybody, so it doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in. I really want to thank everyone who has come out tonight. We've had some really nice conversation going on here in the chat. Lots of great feedback. And just a really nice turnout from across the known world. So thank you all so much. Thank you to everyone who shared the link. I've had 5 shares so far.
Nice.
And, I'm actually going to keep this video up. It won't just disappear when the feed ends. So at the you can share this to your friends, anybody who might have missed it, anybody who wants to go back and ask questions. I'm sure Finn would be happy to check in over the next day or so.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would also like to add that if anybody wants some help writing your beginner Skaldic poetry, feel free to contact me through Facebook. My modern name is Robert Cuthbert. You can find me through that, or you can find me through Ronan Finn. You can also contact me through the website. It's got some contact link information there. So if you want to contact me that way, that's perfectly fine. I am always willing to help if anyone is interested in the process. We'll take some time. We'll find some time and help you walk through it. So I hope to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. I'm not sure what our topic is going to be in 2 weeks, but it will be Norse themed as we head into Bryn Gwlad's fall baronial event. If you get a chance and you happen to be in Onsteora, since about half of you appear to be, please come out to the Bryn Gwlad fall baronial. Shameless plug. This man's actually the guy in charge, and that is on October
26th through the 28th.
That is the weekend before Halloween.
It'll be at the Nolte Island Recreational Area in Seguin, Texas. It's a wonderful location, lots of amenities, beautiful site. We're going to have a ton of fantastic stuff going on, so come join us.
It's going to be a lot of fun, y'all. So, keep an eye on the Kingdom of Onsteora page. I always post ANS updates for live streams there, and look forward to seeing y'all again in 2 weeks. And if you actually live within easy reach of Bryn Gwlad, I encourage you to actually come out in person. You get a lot more out of any of these classes being here and being able to talk to people and interact in person. Live streams are great. Good substitute, but not perfect. So
I also teach a hands-on workshop for this at King's College. So it's a great opportunity to sit down, take 2 hours of your time, and get halfway through something that's going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, folks. Well, I think that just about wraps it up. Share away. Tell people to come watch the stream. All right.
Skål.
Have a great night.